Congressman Adam Schiff, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. Thank you for joining me on this Saturday.
Thanks, Sheinelle. Good to be with you.
Can you confirm there are indeed 1,000 open FBI investigations in 50 states? And are you surprised that the president said this so openly, or is this widely known anyway?
It's certainly widely known that there are investigations in all 50 states. Director Comey has talked about this. And while they haven't expressed publicly a specific number, I think it's certainly known to be well in the hundreds. But I think what fails to understand is most of these investigations involve people that are American citizens. The problem that we've had with homegrown radicalism is that it has been homegrown. It has not been predominantly an issue affecting refugees coming to the country. And I have to say right at the outset how deeply appalled and disturbed I am that we would stop at a U.S. airport an Iraqi who served this country by working with our troops overseas, put his own life at risk, prevent him from being reunited with his family by this ban on refugees. I think it's an appalling act. I think putting in place the beginnings of a religious test is so antithetical to the history of this country, a country founded by religious immigrants, people wanting the free exercise of religion. And it shows in so many respects how this new president does not understand the values that animate the country, the values that founded the country. He likes to portray himself as a strong leader, but these are the actions of a weak and fearful leader, and this is just the wrong direction for the United States.
You say that, and I'm picturing this guy who, he worked for the armed forces for years, and he's stuck in some room, you picture, and can't even talk to an attorney. But listen, you mentioned the part about, I'm glad you mentioned this, the president, he seems to suggest that it's either immigrants or refugees who are being investigated. He said, quote, these are the people we let in. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, there's the fear here, and you know this, that, we're letting in people who, he called it the Trojan horse during the campaign. Can you speak to that? Because there are people who are, frankly, a little afraid about that. So they're not fighting this.
Well, this is how Donald Trump views all of immigrants. When he would talk about immigrants coming from Mexico, for example, it was always in the context of rapists and murderers and drug dealers. That's how he views immigration. And when it comes to people coming as refugees, even though that's part of the tradition of this country, he views refugees as all potential terrorists. And that's a very dark view, obviously, of the rest of the world. It doesn't comprehend the fact that this country was built by immigrants, that people who come here enrich the country, that, frankly, the hundreds of thousands of people that have come as refugees since 9/11 have been helping to build this country. We've had very few problems with any of them. So it is an attitude of fear. And, unfortunately, we now have a president who plays upon those fears. We had a president who just left office who really drew on people's hopes, their aspirations, who appealed to their better angels. And unfortunately, we now have a president that appeals to the darker angels of people in the United States.
Well, speaking of which, I also want you to listen to what the president said about waterboarding in a joint news conference with British Prime Minister Theresa May at the White House on Friday. Take a listen.
Has stated publicly that he does not necessarily believe in torture or waterboarding, or however you want to define it. Enhanced interrogation, I guess, would be a word that a lot of people would like to use. I don't necessarily agree, but I would tell you that he will override because I'm giving him that power.
He seems to use the words torture and waterboarding interchangeably, but will defer to his Secretary of Defense. What do you make of this?
Well, I think it's really part of the same phenomenon. I think that, he thinks this portrays him as a tough guy by saying, well, I'm for torture, but I'm going to defer to somebody else, so we won't do it. The tough guy here is General Mattis. He's the one who understands battle, who has been in battle. He understands that torture doesn't work. As he has told the president, you get far more with a cigarette than you do with coercion. But I think, you have an insecure president who thinks by talking tough, he can portray himself as a strong leader. But this is alienating our allies. Imagine now going to our allies in the Middle East that we need to work with to combat ISIS in the face of a ban on Muslims coming into the country. These are Muslim nations. Imagine if these nations put a ban on that wouldn't allow Christians into their country or wouldn't allow Americans to their country. How much would we want to work with them? But that's what we are now confronting. Imagine our soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan who want the continued help of local translators and contractors and others who's working and are endangering their lives for Americans because they're hoping one day for a better life in America. Those hopes are being dashed. What kind of cooperation and help can we expect from those people now? Well,
to bring this full circle here, and obviously you don't have a crystal ball, where do you think all of this is going? I mean, you have people stuck at the airport right now. It doesn't seem like, a lot of people thought that Trump would change or, I kept hearing the phrase, he's going to ascend to the presidency and he's going to, do things a different way. He's doing things exactly as he said he would. Where does all of this lead?
I think it leads to a diminished standing in the world, for one thing. I think it leads to increased divisions here at home. This is going to be a very erratic presidency because the president himself is erratic, and that's not going to change. And the first indication we had of that, frankly, was the week after the election when he began to make this baseless claim that millions of undocumented immigrants were voting or had voted, and that deprived him of the popular vote. That told all of America, and we've seen this now repeated in many different forms and fashions, this president is not going to grow into the job. The same flaws we saw on the campaign trail are magnified now because he is the most powerful man in the world. And this is going to be a real test of our constitutional democracy. I think those of us who are in the minority now are really going to have to rise up and defend the Constitution, defend American values. And right now we're speaking out because what he is doing in turning away these refugees is not what America stands for. We don't want people around the world to think this is what we stand for. It may be what Donald Trump stands for. This is not what America stands for.
I have to leave it there, Congressman Adam Schiff.